Welcome back, class. In our last lecture, we discussed the victim and creator mindsets, and we talked about how our own self-talk can influence our decisions. In this lesson, we're going to continue looking at ways that we can accept personal responsibility by making wise choices and by challenging the way we think when presented with different obstacles. However, I want to begin this lesson a little differently. Instead of just jumping into the material, I want to share a poem with you by Robert Frost called The Road Not Taken. So let's begin. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Whether we realize it or not, life is a journey with many opportunities and obstacles, and each one requires a choice. Whatever you are experiencing in your life today is, to a great extent, the result of your past choices. Whatever you'll experience in the future will be fashioned by the choices you make from this moment on. In the poem, Frost stated, "Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back." What did he mean by that? Simply put, Frost is alluding to the idea that many times after we make a decision or choose a path, we never get a chance to return to that point in time to see how things might have been different had we chosen a different path. So therefore, it makes sense for us to strive to make wise choices at each fork in the road, so we can create the future that we want. Therefore, as we move through this lesson, I'd like you to think about two questions. First, how can you improve the quality of the decisions you make? Secondly, how can you take full responsibility for the outcomes and experiences in your life? One way we can make better decisions is to think about decision making as a process. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to introduce you to the wise choice process, which is a six-step decision-making model that empowers you to take full responsibility for creating the life that you want. Step one is to define, what is my present situation? In this step, you need to quiet your inner critic and inner defender and let your inner guide define your present situation. By listening to the impartial truth of your inner guide, you'll have a better idea of where to start on your journey without having those feelings of intimidation that the inner critic loves to bring to light. Nor will you decline your role in the process by allowing your inner defender to create false obstacles along your path. Step two is determine what you would like your situation to be. In other words, at the end of my journey, where do I hope to be? What are my goals and/or what are my desired outcomes? Step three is to identify what are your possible choices. In this step, you're just brainstorming. You present each possible choice, good or bad. There is no right or wrong choice. You simply compile a list without judgment. Such a process can give you a sense of freedom because at this step, you are under no obligation to do any of them. If you get stuck at this step, try looking at it from a different point of view. Ask someone you admire what they would do. Or you could also pretend that the problem is someone else's. Continue to let your choices incubate. You don't always need to come up with each choice immediately. Sometimes it's best to set the decision or choices aside and let your unconscious mind work on it. Step four is to ask, what is the likely outcome of each possible choice that you've come up with from your brainstorming session. In this step, you allow each scenario to play out in your mind and try to determine what the outcome will be if you follow that path. If you can't predict the outcome, you may want to seek some additional information. Next, identify which choice or choices you will commit to doing. Then, make sure that your choice aligns with your desired outcome. If no clear choice exists, look for one that will leave you no worse than before or creates the least unfavorable outcome. Finally, determine when and how you will evaluate your plan. Without evaluating your plan along the journey, how will you know if your plan is working? So, just like teachers evaluate students' learning by testing, you need to assess your results, compare your new situation against where you want it to be. If your new situation is similar to where you want it to be, mark it down as a success and continue on your path. If not, it might be time to revise your plan, which means you may need to start over at step one. As you work through the process, remember our choices reveal what we truly believe and value, as opposed to what we say we believe and value. In other words, talk is cheap. Actions speak louder than words. In theory, if everyone followed the wise choice process, then every decision we make would be methodical, well-planned, and would make perfect sense. However, we know that is not always the case. Why is that? How is it that three people can have the same experience or situation but respond to it differently? Simply put, we all perceive our current situation in different lights. Psychologist Albert Ellis says the answer lies in what each person believes caused the event. Ellis stated that the activating event, plus our beliefs about the event, determine our response or the consequences. Take a look at the example on the screen. Notice that in both scenarios, the activating event is the same. However, the first student allows his or her inner critic to enter the thought process, and therefore misinterprets the activating event and invents criticisms that aren't there. Due to the student's low self-esteem, the student believes the instructor didn't show up for our meeting because he or she thinks I'm dumb and that I'll never finish college or that I'm a failure. Therefore, the first student spends the evening being depressed and wasting valuable time. On the other hand, student B allows his or her inner defender to enter the picture and imagines personal insults and slights even though there is a neutral event. Although the activating event is the same, this student views the event in a different light and believes the instructor won't help him or her and that the instructor doesn't even care. Even though the event doesn't warrant an angry response, the judgmental chatter of the inner defender and/or the student's low self-esteem dictates a different response. Therefore, student B gets angry and spends the rest of the night complaining to his or her friends. For that reason, Ellis suggested that our upsets are caused not so much by our problems, but what we think about them. Simply put, we feel awful when the circumstances don't warrant it. Therefore, how we think about the events in our life is the key issue. Building on Ellis's research, Claude Still of Stanford University applied a different theory. Still suggested that stereotypes, or generalizations about members of a particular group, may also affect how we think in certain situations, and may affect our consequences. Still argued that many people shut down due to a fear that their behavior in a particular situation might confirm a negative stereotype for the group to which a person belongs. Therefore, in those situations, your anxiety causes you to complete a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you perform down to your stereotype rather than up to your ability. How does this work? Let's take a look at the example on the screen. In this scenario, the activating event is a female student taking a math test. However, the woman believes the stereotype that women are not good in math. Therefore, what do you think her consequences will be given the stereotype threat? According to Still, the student will likely feel anxious, get distracted, and possibly forget everything she studied. Therefore, she'd be living down to the stereotype instead of living up to her potential. So given what you know about our beliefs and stereotypes, or how stereotypes and beliefs can affect our consequences, how can you dispute those irrational beliefs and make better decisions? First, you need to become aware of your inner critic and inner defender. Then you need to separate yourself from them. By eliminating the negative self-talk, you allow yourself to listen to your inner guide, and you become aware of the impartial truth. So choose wisely the thoughts you allow to occupy your mind. Avoid letting those automatic negative thoughts or stereotypes undermine your results. Replace your thoughts with thoughts that empower. With that in mind, let's now look at a way to dispute the irrational belief that women are bad in math. First, offer evidence that your judgments are wrong. For example, you could say, I did pretty well in high school math, and many women have great jobs using math skills every day. Secondly, offer a positive explanation of the problem. In other words, look for the bright side to the problem. In the example, the student could offer this explanation. When I excel in math, I'll have fewer women to compete against for jobs. In this instance, the student has turned a negative into a positive, so she is reframing her way of thinking about the problem. Third, question the importance of the problem. Ellis stated that a key to correcting irrational thinking is changing a must into a preference. Ellis believed that must thoughts are typically awful, terrible, or even dreadful. Therefore, Ellis suggested that we change must statements into I'd prefer statements. In the example, the student realizes she doesn't have to be the smartest woman in the class, but she can continue to learn every day. So, she's alleviated some of the pressure of the problem by refocusing how she thinks about the problem. Finally, offer a plan to improve the situation. In the example, what plan could the student suggest to dispute the stereotype? She could make a plan to study every night, do all of her homework, ask questions in class, go to tutoring, and see her instructor when needed. Therefore, when she succeeds, she has lived up to her ability instead of living down to the stereotype placed on her. As we've mentioned, the key to success is making wise choices at every fork in the road along our journey. So now when you're presented with difficult choices, ask yourself, what is my current situation and how would I like it to be? Also, ask yourself, what are my possible choices and what are the likely outcomes of each choice? However, as you do this, quiet those negative voices of the inner critic or the inner defender, or those outside forces like stereotypes, and focus on the impartial truth. Then commit to doing one of your choices. If you'll do this, you'll make wise choices along the way. However, don't forget to constantly evaluate your plan to make sure you're completing the right actions that will move you towards your goals and dreams. That concludes the information for this section. See you next time.